This is the Real Footy podcast. Thanks for joining us to tip round 4. My name's Andrew Wu and I'm joined again by Peter Ryan. How are you, Pete?
I'm very happy, Wooey. I'm very happy because the Crows got up and made me look very smart on Saturday. I walked out of the G where I was covering a game, watching the result from Adelaide, Port Adelaide, and thinking, I am a genius. I was the only part of the Age crew to tip the Crows. And I was right, and then I just blew the lead the next day when Sydney lost to Melbourne. So I was really grumpy with Sydney.
I thought about you on Saturday night when that result came through in the showdown, because I was about to say, if you got it wrong, I was going to bag you for tipping like a Yahoo.
Yeah, well.
but you got it right, so
listen
I'm
up,
stay silent.
listen up.
Well, from last week, 5 was the going rate amongst the Age tipsters, which I'd like to think is probably a reflection of how difficult last week was.
It was very difficult.
So at the moment, our leaderboard, we've got Emma Carney on 17 with John Pyrrhic, and then there's a whole heap of us on 15. So
It's like the ladder, isn't it? With I think there's 8 teams on 4 points.
Yeah, 2 real contenders and everyone.
Yeah.
We don't know what to make of it.
Exactly.
Okay, first game of the round on, it's actually, we think it's Easter Thursday, it's actually Maundy Thursday. Brisbane versus Collingwood at the Gabba. How do you see this one, Pete?
Well, I won't ask you a question about what you just said because you probably need to know the answer before you ask a question, isn't that right? This is always a tough game and made tougher by the fact that Brisbane were, look, let's face it, they were woeful against the Bulldogs. And they've been woeful in their 2 away games from the Gabba, but they were very good against Melbourne. So I'm tipping Brisbane mainly for 2 reasons. The home factor, which you may elaborate on, and the fact that Collingwood lost Darcy Cameron and they've also lost Mason Cox, so they're going to have to be really creative in the ruck, and that gives the Big O a chance to dominate and probably do enough to get Brisbane over the line.
Yeah, those numbers about Brisbane at home, I had a look before, since 2019, and that's the year they came good, they have won 40 at home and lost 8, and 4 of those losses have been in finals.
Wow.
So they generally don't lose at home, but with all that in mind, I'm still tipping Collingwood because
Really?
I saw Brisbane last week, and I just can't trust them at the moment. On top of round 1, where they were so poor again last week, beaten it for the contested ball. So that's 2 in 3 weeks where they've been found wanting in that area, and the 1 week where they did come good was against Melbourne, who were probably the best in that area. So it's too hard to tip this one, but I'm thinking just on what I've seen so far this year, I think Collingwood, their gap between their best and the worst is a lot narrower. So I think Collingwood for me, but not by much.
Do the lights stay on, really?
Well, it depends what the score is. Huh?
Exactly.
Next game, Good Friday. North Melbourne, who become the Good Friday hosts, taking on Carlton for the first time on this public holiday. And North's record over Carlton's pretty good, but can you make a case for North at all?
Well, the only case I can make is that they get 2 of their key midfielders back, LDU, Luke Davies-Uniacke, and Jai Simpkin, who both missed that game against Hawthorn. And the fact that LDU was a late out was a bit of a shattering blow when you heard that come through on Saturday afternoon just before the game, because it would have potentially made you pick Hawthorn. I think there would have been a lot of people in that boat. So that's the case I can make for North Melbourne, although losing Logue, given that Mackay's out as well, is a big blow for their defence, particularly with the Carlton tall timber, which we seem to talk about every week. But they've just got something going, Carlton, even though their margins of their victories haven't been good. They will be, or big, they'll be too strong for North Melbourne on Good Friday.
Yeah, you think with Griffin Logue out and Ben Mackay against Charlie Curnow and Harry Mackay, that at some point, if it's a close game, you reckon those two, the Twin Towers for Carlton, will come through and do something. I mean, we saw Charlie Curnow do it last week against the Giants. He got 2 goals against the flow, even though he was probably beaten for the day. I think Buckley got votes from the coaches. But the only query I would have is maybe Alistair Clarkson might conjure up something extraordinary with knowing that he's got his 2 key backs out, and might try and orchestrate a game around that. But safe tip, I think Carlton by a few goals.
And Wooey, when do you think the Mackay brothers will be seen on the same ground together? When are you tipping that happens?
So you don't think they're the same people?
No, I don't think they're the same people.
Oh, geez, well, it's 8 years now, isn't it? So
It's ridiculous.
maybe 2024.
Right.
It's a Saturday afternoon, and the first of our swing games, Adelaide versus Fremantle. I don't know where to go with this.
Why do you refer to it as a swing game?
Well, I think it's a genuine 50-50 game. I think the market
that's
would support that. Freo's form last week, I mean, I know they got the job done in the end, but 5 injuries to West Coast, so they were probably entitled to win the way they did. And Adelaide, I mean, they were very impressive against Port, and I mean, you clearly must have liked them because you tipped them. And their first 2 rounds, they were probably okay, even though they'd lost. So, yeah, I mean, last year I think Freo won. Was it round 1? They just got over the line, and they were a finals team. And you'd think that they're not going as well this year. Adelaide are going a little bit better. So I'm thinking Adelaide, but I'm not confident. But this is one of the games that I think really matter in terms of tipping.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's why I'm tipping Adelaide with absolute confidence. They are an absolute certainty to back it up this week. And that's one of the rules of tipping. If you have a great result, you follow that team into the next week and back them to the hilt. And I'm doing that with the Crows.
Well, we'll see. I'll think about you, 4 o'clock Saturday afternoon then this time. I hope you're right, because I'm tipping Adelaide as well. The twilight game, Richmond against the Western Bulldogs. Richmond, I think, clear favourites, but I'm not overly confident. How are you saying
Well, I reckon this is a really tough game to tip. I'm tipping the Bulldogs, but not with any real certainty, although I think if Bont's in the sort of mood again this week that he was in last week, they can actually get on top of the Richmond midfield and start to get the supply that they need to make Norton and Rory Lobb an influence, and Richmond might struggle against them given they've got a few key backs out. They get a few players back, Richmond. They get Dusty back in all likelihood, which will help them, but I just think the Bulldogs, as I still think they are at least a top 6 team, they will take some beating.
I wonder how much last week would take out of the Dogs in terms of I sense it was a real sort of line in the sand game for them, and they would have invested a lot emotionally in that game, and after getting the result, whether there's a bit of a letdown from this week, I'm not too sure.
It reminds me, Willie, of when you say that, I don't know if you'd know this, but Terry Wallace, when he was coaching the Bulldogs, used to make the players sign the ball, and they were
I remember that, the ball game.
The ball game, and they were big games that they had to win, and they'd sign the ball and then go out and win. That was what that week felt like for the Dogs, didn't it?
Yeah, well, exactly. Because if they got to 0-3, then they were in big trouble. And the way Bont played last week, it wasn't his best game, but it was just
we're not going to lose game.
Yeah, it was if you're going to beat me, if you're going to beat the Dogs, you're going to get past me, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of mentality is hard to get every week. A coach used to say to me, you probably have about maybe 2 response games every season. So Dogs have used one of them. I've tipped Richmond only because it's at the MCG. If this game was down the road at Marvel, where Richmond fans don't go, I probably would have tipped the Dogs. But Richmond for me, but not with too much confidence. The Saturday night game sees the unbeaten and top of the ladder Saints, against Gold Coast, who caused a bit of an upset last week.
Yeah, a good win from the Gold Coast. And, I was half thinking of tipping the Gold Coast to cause an upset, because St Kilda, winning 4 games in a row is a really hard thing to do. It's a difficult thing to do. And St Kilda performed unbelievably well, but they're very disciplined and it's a hard-working game. And the Gold Coast are probably as good as they showed against Geelong. That's probably their standard. They're probably about that good. They've been disappointing in the opening 2 rounds, if that makes sense. But I couldn't bring myself to tip the Suns because they've let me down all year. So I'm sticking with the Saints. Winning form's good form. Does that make sense?
They're
just so hard to score against, St Kilda. They're in the game now. Ross Lyon's transformed and it's been an unbelievable performance. And if a team's hard to score against, they're hard to beat.
Well, I think with Gold Coast, at home, they're very, very hard to beat in their conditions. But I reckon on the road, they're probably about a 4 to 5 goal worse off team. It's hard to quantify, but I feel like travelling for them has been a bit difficult. But I'm tipping the Saints. We've got the next Saturday night game, and that sees the Sydney Swans against Port Adelaide, both coming off pretty disappointing losses last week, Pete.
Yeah, well, Sydney was a disappointing loss, but nothing of the degree to which Port Adelaide's loss was disappointing. Port Adelaide are really under a lot of pressure now, given all the talk around the coach, who they have to stick with until the end of the year, regardless of what happens this week. But certainly if they want to get their season back on track, they have to beat Sydney, but I don't think they'll be able to. Sydney are a good side at home. They've got Buddy up and running. Their form wasn't... They just got jumped by Melbourne, and then at the end they couldn't stick with them because they'd worked their way back in the game. You'd know better than I would because you're at the game, but I think Sydney are at least a consistent performer, and you can rely on them putting in a good effort, whereas Port Adelaide would be half a miracle if they... who knows what Port Adelaide's going to show.
Yeah, I think the Swans, they've got a bit of a point to prove against the real big teams. I think last year we saw them against some of the teams with the big-bodied midfielders. Their midfielders, as good as they are, just didn't quite have the muscle to match them in the contest. And I think last year, we saw in the grand final, and we saw last week with Melbourne, some of their real big-bodied midfielders like Petrarca, Oliver. When it really gets going, I think Swans are just found wanting a little bit. I still like the Swans for this year, but I'm either thinking that they need to just go away, work on their flaws, and then we'll mark them again round 8 when they play Collingwood. But I think they should beat Port.
Yeah, well, Port Adelaide's defence has been absolutely pathetic. It has been. They've conceded over 100 points the last 2 weeks, and fair dinkum. Their ability to make a contest in their back half, they should be embarrassed.
Does that also speak a bit about their midfield, though? Their midfield not defending hard enough?
Well, that's true.
Back?
Yeah, no, that's true too, but jeepers.
And this is Port's first game at the SCG since round 2, 2018, so they might need their sat-nav from the hotel to find the ground. I'm tipping the Swans. So.
Same, Swans.
On to Sunday, and the first of those games is Essendon hosting Greater Western Sydney, which is, I reckon this game's a bit trickier than it looks on paper.
I reckon Essendon are going to be a really tricky side at this stage of the year to pick correctly, because they've got the capacity as they work their way back in the game against St Kilda. They obviously won their first 2 games. But they've only beaten Gold Coast and Hawthorn, so it's not an incredibly strong form line, whereas the Giants have been... I still think they should have beaten West Coast, and they were very unlucky against Carlton, particularly with that decisive free kick being paid at the end. They're good enough to beat Essendon. The only reason I'm picking Essendon is a home crowd at Marvel Stadium. I think will get them over the line.
I'm going against you here. I'm tipping a bit of an upset. I've gone the Giants here. And my reasons are that they've won their last 4 against Essendon. They do okay at Docklands. They don't really like... MCG is not their ground, but when they play at Marvel, they're pretty good on it. I don't think Essendon are a 3-1 team, which they would be if they won this week, and I don't think the Giants are a 1-3 team, which they would be if they lost. And Toby Green won't have 2 bad ones in a row.
That's all really good.
So for that
reason, so I've swapped. No, I'm not joking. I'm sticking with Essendon, but it's good to see you show some bravery. What are we, into the 30th game of the year or something like that, and you finally tipped an upset?
Well, at some point you got to make your move, but I like the Giants. I had them in my 8 at the start of the year, and based on what I saw last week and round 1, I'm quite happy with that.
Good tipping, Willie. Good tipping. I'm looking forward to watching that game.
The other game on Sunday is I think it might be a bit of a lopsided one. Yep. The Walking Wounded at West Coast against Melbourne. Yeah,
Melbourne are definite winners of this game, and that's no disrespect to West Coast. They've lost 7 players from last week's game. They are crippled by injury, and it's just really difficult. And Melbourne are the form team of the competition along with Collingwood, so you'd expect them to be able to go over there and get the job done without losing too much sleep.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't think we really need to spend too much time on this game. I'm tipping Melbourne by 5 goals.
This is the one when you wake up on a Sunday morning and you think, oh, geez, I'm going terribly in the tipping. And you think, well, at least I've got Melbourne.
Exactly. And also, it's one of those games where you just don't tip the upset because it's going to blow up in your face.
Yeah.
Easter Monday, the traditional Easter Monday clash between the winless reigning premiers Geelong against Hawthorn, who got themselves off the bottom of the ladder.
I think Geelong will win, but they are playing very ordinary football at the moment, and it's as much on belief that of their capability as anything related to their form. Geelong will be too good for Hawthorn, but there is a potential to tip an upset if you were really desperate or if your heart was with Hawthorn, just so you could celebrate it unequivocally if they actually beat Geelong. But I'm tipping Geelong.
I think the Hawks treat this as a bit of a grand final, don't they? Geelong Easter Monday, now that they're not playing finals anymore.
That's true.
Hawks. But
yep.
I think Geelong for me. Even though, I mean, this game means, funny enough, if they had won last week, you'd probably be able to make a bit of a case for Hawthorn this week. But given how much is on the line now for Geelong, I don't think they're going through the motions at all. I reckon they really need to win it and put everything on the line.
Well, Duncan in College Asney should be back, and Sam De Konin's a big loss for Geelong, but they've actually lost him in 2 of the 3 games mid-game, and that's been a real disruption to their defence. So if they can have a little bit of luck, Geelong are too good. Look, let's face it, they won the premiership last year, and Hawthorn are going to be near the bottom of the ladder. Geelong just gets it done.
Yeah, feel for Sam De Koning. Every game he's played this year, he's had
some
some
sort of...
sort
been in the wars, hasn't he?
Yeah, it might be good for him just to have a weekend off where he doesn't wake up the next day.
Be good for all of us, mate.
Sore. Well, that's all for today. Thanks for being with us. Make sure to subscribe, rate and review wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love to hear from you via email at realfootypod@theage.com.au. Check out the rest of our expert tips at theage.com.au/AFL. Thanks for listening. The podcast will be back next Tuesday after the extended Easter round. Enjoy your Easter break and may your team get up.